Come back to another video on my channel, and in today's video we're going to look at how Iñigo Pérez's Rayo Vallecano secured a place in the Conference League final after beating Strasbourg across two legs. So the main focus of this video is going to be on the second leg between the two sides. The first leg ended up being very similar, so on screen you can see how Strasbourg lined up in a 4-3-3. As for Rayo Vallecano, they lined up in a 4-2-3-1, which is their go-to formation, has been for a while under Iñigo Pérez and previously under Andoni Iraola. Rayo Vallecano are a team that will build up if they're given a chance, if they're not pressed high. But if they are pressed high, they are quite happy to go along. So if we switch to a traditional build-up pattern for them within this game and in general throughout the season, the main thing here being the wingers high and wide. This sort of pins the fullbacks into position, and then same with the fullbacks. They're very much, sometimes they're a bit deeper, sometimes one will be a bit higher, sort of to create this 2 versus 1 out wide, with the other one a little bit deeper, or sometimes they'll both be high. This sort of, again, it varies depending on how the opposition press. One of the key players within all this is the number 10, or in this case number 7, Izzy Palazón. He's sort of given the license to roam and to link up, so he might go out wide to link up and sort of create that 3 versus 2. Sometimes he goes even further wider and the fullback will invert. Again, similar sort of 3 versus 2, but slightly mixing it up, confusing the defensive mid who to mark, whether to go out wide or whether to come inside. You'll see a few of these examples in some of the clips. Or sometimes he'll come to this side, and again, same thing. Just sort of confusing that defensive mid, whether or not he's pushing in here, he's following him, which then sort of leaves 2 versus 1 that wide. It's just a lot of variety. Like I say, he's given a lot of freedom within their press and such, and they are quite happy to go along to him. If the pressing's high, sort of they bring in the press and they'll go along to him, and then they'll sort of build from there. Press pretty aggressively in terms of trying to win the ball back. So if we just reset the board, you would have the striker sort of pressing on the goalkeeper, trying to force him one way, and then 2 of these centre mids would be pressing on the 2 DMs for Rayo Vallecano, and then the DM for Strasbourg was sort of trying to stop Palazón, but he sort of held his position quite a lot, which allowed him that freedom. And then again, the 2 wingers for Strasbourg were sort of sitting in between the fullback and the winger without really affecting too much. So when there was a bit more inside, the keeper was able to find these passes out wide, or the same this side, they had to find the passes out wide. So in the end, they did struggle with that. If they did force them long, then, like I say, the striker for Real were winning quite a lot of the first balls, and then they did have players who would sit on and sort of get round, and then Rayo Vallecano would win the ball, and then they'd build from a higher position. So you can see here the build-up shape from Rayo Vallecano. They've got the 4 defensive players. Like I say, one fullback's a little bit higher, the other one's a little bit deeper, and then you've got your 2 defensive midfielders. You've got your wingers high and wide, and then you've got the number 10, Izzy Palazón, again, has got all this sort of space to go into. So if we just run the clip on, the ball's with the keeper, he goes out wide to the centre backs, and Strasbourg have all narrowed in, so all the players have moved in this way to sort of try and keep Rayo pressed in. But what you have is 2 free players. So you've got Izzy Palazón, and then you've got the full back high and wide. So if we move it on, centre back plays that long pass, and then they're out the other side with a 3 versus 2. Again, here we've got another clip, highlight the same thing. 4 defensive players, 4 backs almost on the same line, and then you've got your 2 defensive midfielders in this position. And again, this time you've got Palazón, who's actually took a position out wide, which has allowed the winger to be a little bit more narrow. But you'll see as the clip rolls on, this allows for a long pass from the goalkeeper, and what this allows Rayo to do is they do have 3 players around the ball, so that when Palzon does win the flick on and he finds his striker, they've got numbers around the ball comes inside and they win a free kick. So that's another way of how they bypass the press by just going long. Like I said, they're more than comfortable doing this. They've got the setup around the ball for them to be able to achieve this with success. So this particular clip is quite interesting because, like I touched upon at the start of the video, Izzy Palzon will take positions in a wide area, and this time the player that's come inside is the right back, so he's in tons of space. And if you check the position of the Strasbourg DM, who's just here, you can see he's not too sure who to actually mark. Does he pick the player up inside, or does he stay with Palzon, who technically would be his man? It sort of does neither of them things, so when the ball goes long from the goalkeeper, it's just a nice little pass into the right back, touches a bit bad, and then he managed to get out of the press. And again, they beat that press through just simple passes, but just by rotating the positions of some of the players on the pitch. Again, similar sort of setup. You've got the right back who's coming field to that inside position, and the main difference here being that the centre back is attempting to take that wider role just out here, and then one of your defensive midfielders is filling in that gap just there, still creating almost a back four with two pivot players, but one of them being the right back. So keeper plays a nice pass inside, and he pops it back off to the centre back, who again, because of the positioning of Rayo Vallecano's wide players, nice and high. If you take the deepest player, for example, here, the centre back, and the distance between that, they try to create large spaces, harder to press as a unit because the gaps are so large, and they'll go quite happy to go long, which again, something to do here. Ball's played out over the top. Don't get on the end of this, but what they do is they force Strasbourg back, and then they can shift the back line up, and then they can look to attempt to press them, which if we jump to the tactics board, we can see how they look to press. In terms of how Rayo pressed, again, they sort of have a hybrid approach. They will have almost a 4-4-2, but the roles of certain players is what's interesting. So the wide players, their role is, in terms of being a hybrid, is push out to the fullback if the pass is played out this side, and again, the opposite wide player will tuck in onto the other centre mid, allowing everyone to sort of shift across. Or if the ball is played out this side, then this winger will tuck in, and then the winger on the opposite side will push out onto the fullback. And sort of the role of striker is to force the opposition one way, and they did this quite effectively. They did play, and they managed to pin Strasbourg into the corner, often forcing them long from these sort of deep positions, and then it allowed Rayo to win the ball back, and then again they would sort of build out from there, either directly through an attack into the space if they won it in this sort of area of the pitch, or they'd reset and then look to build up from their attack. So if we jump across to some clips, we'll see this in action. So if we look at this first clip in terms of how Rayo press, so like the tactics board shows, it's almost a diamond press. Two forward players here, and then you've got the diamond in midfield, and then you've got your back line here with, well, almost man-to-man in this case, but the key player, I guess, here being the defensive midfielder who just makes up that 5 versus 4 on the back line. So if we run the clip on, they manage to force them out wide. So what you see here is the winger is going to make sure that pass to the right centre mid for Strasbourg is not on, and then everybody else is pressing in just to make sure that they can't get out. And what they do is, ball comes inside and they've got numbers around the ball, and then from this position they can reset and then look to put together an attack of their own. Again here, very similar clip to the first one that I showed, you've still got that diamond shape in midfield, and then you still have the two strikers, just one of them positioned a little bit deeper on the defensive midfield for Strasbourg. If you play the clip on again, the ball goes out wide, and that's the jump then for Palzon to jump onto the left centre back, and then one of the midfielders to jump on the defensive midfield. And if you see elsewhere across the pitch, they're almost man to man, ready to that, but you still have this player here, but because the ball's on the opposite side, he's not worried about, so you get the full-back tucking in on him. And then what this gives you is two defensive midfielders against one striker, so they've got that 2 versus 1 advantage. So if you play the clip on, ball goes into the centre, and again the turn over the ball, and if you see the position that Rayo then pick up the ball, I think they do in this case recycle it back to the centre back, but if they didn't and he turned, then they can directly attack their back line in numbers, and obviously they're in a position then Strasbourg where they're in the transition, so it's harder for them to stop that. Annoyingly, the broadcasters missed out the start bit, but similar to what the 2 previous was in terms of trying to play out, this time they've come across to this side. What's key here for me, and what just want to include this because it highlights it quite well, is this is the right winger for Rayo Vallecano. I can see he's in that inside position, and what that allows him to do is to, when the ball comes across, immediately put pressure on him on the left centre back. He loses the ball, they manage to pick up, and through this they create a good chance, which unfortunately he blazes over. But again, that clip just highlights how effective Rayo's press was against Strasbourg, who, to be honest, on the day they wasn't the best. I've seen them a few times this season, and they are normally a lot better than this. But overall, I think Iñigo Pérez definitely won that tactical battle between him and Gary O'Neill. I think Iñigo Pérez got his tactics spot on in both of these games. Like I said earlier, the first leg were very similar to this in terms of Rayo Vallecano had a lot of joy pressing high, winning the ball back, and then they had a lot of joy in their own build-up. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and like and share, and I'll see you for the next one. Thank you.